Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Metaphysical Media. And hi, Stephen Frampton. How are you doing this evening?
I'm very well, thank you, Stephen Lewis.
You know, I'm quite happy that the announcing lady didn't clip me off this time like she did last week. Even though she waits forever to get started.
She could be rude. I mean, it's our show.
I know,
Who
right?
is she anyway?
She owes us like 15 seconds. Notice how it jumped from 5 to 15 seconds, but it felt like eternity. Anyway, we have a lot on our docket tonight, don't we, Steve?
We do because we've made this decision to look at what's happening in the world, what the big news items are, rather than just focusing on one subject. So we've got quite a list here.
Absolutely. Not to worry. Those of you who enjoy the more probing analyses, we're not turning our back on those. So please do not storm our offices, and we appreciate you reacting calmly to the announcement. However, tonight we're going to try to clip it along at a quick pace because we've had so much to happen. Especially we can start. I can imagine in the Mideast with the entire ISIS fiasco. They've been in the news lately quite a bit, haven't they, Steve? Quite active.
Absolutely, and some terrifying stories, and it seems to be getting worse. They seem to be capturing more territory, and there was even a report that there are fears they may have their eye on Lebanon as well as the territories they've captured in Syria and northern or northwestern Iraq.
Yeah, well, I mean, why shouldn't they? They've been facing success after success after success, and they've been enriching themselves besides. And in addition, they've sort of been, swelling their ranks with an entire generation of people from all over the world who want to go there and get a chance to, mete out some death and destruction.
Yes, and the video that was produced earlier this week by ISIS was boasting, in effect, that they have the best ever recruitment from abroad, and there are obviously fears in many nations about people actually coming home trained as hardcore terrorists and being able to conduct acts of terrorism in their home nations. I know that France was looking at some new legislation to potentially, or to prevent people from leaving France to go to Syria or Iraq.
Oh, wow.
And I think the U.S. authorities have been explaining to European nations how concerned they are about these people that are leaving and going to travel or participate. And the problem we have, of course, now in Europe is that there are so many countries in Europe, and you can just stroll across the border from one to another. It's quite difficult to monitor the movement of people.
Right, especially when the border in question is in the middle of some barren desert, and we're talking about a region that accepts is a very important area for the trafficking of heroin and opium products from Afghanistan, the so-called Golden Route or the Silk Road, traveling through Iran and through that through the region. So. And it's successful precisely because the borders are so porous. So a lot of nasty trafficking is going through there. Now we've got mercenaries, probably, I'm just guessing here, a bunch of idealistic young people, who like to play video games, and now they get a chance to actually go out and get off some real aggression. And then, of course, they're probably idealistic people, too. I mean, I've seen adult males, Westerners, people with educated British accents and American accents, even people speaking very, very good English, and it really raises a phobia. Do you see it? My big fear is that it's going to incline the masses toward, I hate to say it, but almost a sort of justified xenophobia, if such an oxymoron can be said to exist. It's fearful. It's dreadful.
It is. And particularly when I look back at Iraq's chart and see that. You remember when we discussed Iraq in quite a lot of detail? I think we had a whole show on Iraq. We explained to our listeners that in the natal chart for Iraq, the south node of the moon, which is a problematic spot. I see when the south node is activated in a person's chart, so when it's activated by progression and then by transit, it triggers quite unfortunate events, often the most unfortunate events. And we've got the situation in the Iraqi chart in which the south node has progressed and is conjunct the natal Mars in Aries, that fieriest of fire signs, and we've got transiting Uranus approaching that point slowly. It's transiting Uranus is at 16 degrees of Aries. So in time, and I'll calculate when in a moment, Uranus will reach the south node in the Iraqi chart, and that's likely to be a very unfortunate time for Iraq. If you, not that you can consider their current situation or recent history or history for a long, long time as fortunate, but also at the moment, Pluto, transiting Pluto, is an exact opposition to the part of fortune in the Iraqi chart, and that alone, before even considering all of the other dynamics in the chart, that is a huge challenge. We explained and stated that we feel very concerned about Iraq because of the astrological dynamics, and it doesn't look like it's going to get easier.
No, in fact, it's not. Looking at it's good to analyze the nodal axis, as you mentioned, because I tell you what, I'm convinced that the south node, even though it's malefic, I think that it's actually working in favor of ISIS. I think it's really helped. I think the south node in the ISIS Caliphate chart, which is set for 12 p.m. in Tikrit, Iraq, for 29 June 2014. What I think, I really think the south node is a detriment to the people who are getting defrauded. The people who are being conquered and stripped of their territory. And being in Aries, as you pointed out, is such a fiery, brash sort of energy, very warlike, and it's retrograde. And interestingly enough, I want to point out that Uranus is actually moving faster than the lunar nodes. People might think that the lunar nodes move quickly because they're attached. They're attached by concept to the moon. This isn't really the case. The lunar nodes represent crossing points in a plane for the moon, and as such, they only move like 1 degree per month or whatever. They move extremely slow.
Isn't it? I think if my memory serves me correctly, it's 28 years to cycle the zodiac. Yeah,
you're right. It's an insane. Its movements are on the par of Jupiter or Saturn. No, Jupiter can get around the zodiac in half that time. So the nodes, they move slowly. Uranus is going to catch, and plus the node, as we see, is retrograde. It's moving backwards. And it's moving backwards to meet Uranus. So this is a mutually applying conjunction, which ratchets up the intensity of it. So these guys have, they're like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. They got the golden ticket, as it were, cosmologically speaking. And it pains me to say that. It really does. And looking at the North Node, we see that it's doing its prescribed function and acting in a benefic fashion for the ISIS Caliphate chart. This chart with the node conjunct Mars, I'd say that fits with ISIS.
That's in the ISIS chart with Mars conjunct the North Node. Is that correct?
Right.
So how interesting then that you've got Iraq with Mars at the South Node, right. and then the ISIS Caliphate with Mars at the North Node. And actually, if you think of it, it makes a lot of sense, because really the South Node is, well, the ancients called it the point of self-undoing. So it's almost like a power outage. It's a vacuum point in any chart. And then the North Node is something that we almost progress towards or assert ourselves towards. And really, the use of weapons and military action has been Iraq's undoing for a long time. So it makes sense that Mars would be at Iraq's south node, and the use of weaponry and military action, aggression, seems to be absolutely what ISIS is all about. So it makes sense that it's at their north node.
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting because Mars in Libra is a theme for Middle Eastern Marses. Another important chart to consider in Middle Eastern affairs is the chart set for the Middle East Mandate by the British. The date for that was April 25th in 1920, and that was set for a time of 1122 in San Remo, Italy. And essentially, this was the time after World War I when the rather ambiguous and ill-conceived borders of what is today the Middle East were drawn up by European powers. And here in this Middle East Mandate chart, we have Mars at 29 degrees Libra, conjunct the ISIS Caliphate's north node, and very similar in tone to the ISIS Mars. You see a theme here.
Stephen, you know what, though, Stephen? That's absolutely fascinating. I'm so grateful and glad that you drew everybody's attention to this chart, this Middle East Mandate, because I didn't know about this Middle East Mandate or the existence of this chart until you told me about it. Right. But what absolutely shocks and worries me in that chart is have you got it progressed there?
No, I haven't done any progressions for this chart yet. I'm sure they'll be fascinating.
Well, listen to this. When you progress it, the north node's at 11 degrees Scorpio, and that's the eclipse point that we discussed that gets triggered in the middle of August. It's also the point of Palestine's natal Pluto, and it's the point of Israel's south node of the moon. That is just a shocker.
Well, I mean, cosmologically speaking here, it's sort of like fitting together puzzle pieces from two separate puzzles, but they interlock and become a single unified entity because of this. And absolutely, this sort of hinging between charts is important. It's definitely very vital. And I think, speculating here, could it mean that ISIS would become interested in the Palestinian cause? It makes a lot of sense. I mean, that provides them a vehicle, for tangoing with the European powers. But by the same token, then they would come into conflict with other groups there, like Hezbollah, which is a Shiite group, and ISIS are, of course, Sunni, and they would be at odds. Now, this is another thing I want to point out to people about ISIS. It would be a mistake to lump these guys into the category of your typical, if I can use that word, Islamic insurgent group. These guys are pretty much rejected by everybody. The rebel fighters in Syria, for example, they don't want to have anything to do with them. They don't get along with ISIS. They don't want them there.
Well, there is, the rebel. To be honest with you, when we hear the term the rebel faction in Syria, and particularly Bashar al-Assad uses that term, the terrorists, the rebels, the core of that group is moderate. They're just sick and tired of Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship and the brutalization of the Syrian people. But you're spot on that this group, ISIS, is far worse than anything we've seen before. I mean, really, they remind me of Boko Haram in Nigeria. I remember when we were reading about the Boko Haram, we're hearing all about their dreadful crimes and kidnapping these 200 schoolgirls, things like that. I was thinking, well, gosh, this group is just the pits. It's the worst, and ISIS seems to be in the same league. They make other terrorists look quite nice.
Yeah, ISIS definitely enjoys the shock factor. They have no awareness of human rights. They practice a version of Islam that is essentially corrupt and driven by ego and vanity.
Yeah.
It's. I definitely, one thing I like to stress to people is that definitely you should not make the mistake of equating ISIS's actions with anything that resembles Islam, or Islam, which is the same religion and is among the West and among the world's greatest religions for sure. I have a deep and abiding respect for Islam, and from what I've seen of it as an amateur student, I'm not a convert, or anything like that, but from what I've seen of Islam, beautiful things can come from it. Many great astrologers came from the Islamic tradition, but this was in the Middle Ages. Such a thing would not be possible today with childish baboons like ISIS running around.
And Stephen, I said that I would check the Iraqi chart and see when transiting Uranus reaches that point.
You did.
The South Node. It's actually summer of next year. So I feel very concerned about Iraq and the whole situation in the Middle East. I know that we said that we would talk about what's happening in Israel, and this. We talked a little bit, I think, about the kidnappings of the 3 young Israeli guys who were executed apparently by Hamas, and then the dreadful execution, but the young Palestinian boy, 17 years old, burned alive. And that these things have triggered a massive increase in tension between Israel and Hamas. I think what's sad with these nations is that these extremists are doing what they do, but with enormous consequences for the regular people, for the civilians, and they're not representative of your average person. Hamas is not representative of the average Palestinian. I mean, I was reading just before the show that there are people, women and children in Gaza queuing up at the Egyptian border. The Egyptians have decided to open the border and start allowing people to cross for medical treatments, because one of the great issues in Palestine is that there's such a stranglehold on Palestine that they don't have the medical supplies that are required to treat people that are injured.
Palestine is a humanitarian nightmare. It's a disaster. I'm sure that if we knew the full story of the humanitarian crimes being exacted upon the Palestinian people, it would turn not only our stomachs, but it would also turn our heart against what have long been traditional diplomatic alliances in the Middle East. It's something that we really can't ignore as an international community. If the UN condemns a Rwandan genocide, or if the UN condemns the behavior of Detroit, for example, as it did here recently, where Detroit wanted to cut off water services to 30,000, maybe even more people who couldn't afford to pay those services. The UN, had to step in there and say that's a humanitarian no-no to deny these people water. But we don't really see much of that happening. Now, the UN has tried to discipline Israel's behavior before. It actually referred to Zionism, the political philosophy. It actually officially referred to it as racist, and then rescinded that resolution some years or months later. I don't remember how. Under
pressure, for sure.
Oh, no doubt there was pressure to do so. But
don't get me wrong. I feel for Israel in this, because of all these rockets being sent over the border. It must be dreadful to live in an environment in which you have to jump into an air raid shelter or take cover because rockets are being slung across the border. But I do agree with you about the great tragedy of the Palestinian people, and Gaza is a very, very sad, tragic story, and particularly at the moment when obviously the Israelis are taking action against Hamas to try and take out some of these rocket launchers and some of these individuals that are actually launching weapons. I understand that, but sadly Hamas seem to hide themselves in civilian areas, and it has a great cost for the Palestinian people, most of whom probably don't support Hamas and just want to live their lives, raise their children, feed their kids like everybody else does.
Yeah, that's not going to be possible, I'm afraid, unfortunately, for the Palestinian people. And, that's just part of their struggle. That's where they're at. I mean, better things are going to come for them, I certainly hope. But, in a way, it's hard to talk about things like concepts like due process. What becomes of due process when your neighborhood is being shelled by rockets?
Yes.
We're not talking about kids with slingshots or 22 rifles or whatever. We're talking about people with rocket-propelled grenades, man, firing that into your suburb. Americans don't know what that's like.
No. And as we've said before, the situation between Israel and Gaza is going to get worse. I'm sure it's going to get worse based upon the discussions we've had about the eclipse that occurred in November on the South Node in the first house of the Israeli chart, and it's going to be triggered by Mars, the planet of conflict, of missiles. I mean, it is the missile, the arrow, the phallus, and in the middle of August it will trigger that South Node point. So there are now apparently Obama is saying that, or there was some announcement today that the US is going to step in and help broker a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, but we were already trying that before, and if we failed, and I don't think we've got huge credibility with either Palestine or Israel to help negotiate.
Well, you mentioned before how the Islamic warriors in this battle are integrated into the community, which no doubt draws some of the Israeli, response to those communities. It's quite natural, I suppose, from a tactical point of view. But their integration into the community is very clearly shown in the symbolism of both the Middle East Mandate chart and the ISIS Caliphate chart with the Mars in Libra. Libra is the symbol for the community, you see, and with Mars there, that's a very clear symbol that the symbolism is saying, hey, the warriors are going to be in the suburbs. They're going to be in your apartment dwellings. They're going to be among you. They're going to be your husband. They're going to be your baker. They're going to be your candlestick maker, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to be integrated to the citizenry. And this Mars in the Middle East Mandate, which is very, I guess the word is paradigmatic. It sort of is the stamp, the mold from which the Martian aggression is going to be manifested in the Middle East. And it's very tightly conjunct the Israeli ascendant. So this is one of those hinges that ties these two charts together and makes them interact together. There's a very potent synastry between the two charts. And this, it doesn't matter what outsiders try to do to dash the water on the fires of these people. It's not going to work. It's, in essence, destined not to work unless the people involved start acting with more consciousness. That's always a possibility. However, the statistical chances of that happening are quite low because, as I said before, the mass is a bit more faded than the individual.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, Stephen, for the middle of August with Israel and Palestine is that there is a far more effective attack upon Israel. I'm not saying that this is definitely how it will unfold, but let's remember that the eclipse point we spoke about is on the south lunar node in the Israeli chart, that indicates something very unfortunate for the nation in question, Israel, and it's going to be triggered by Mars, the planet of conflict. So I'd like to hear your view on it, because I'm trying to figure out, well, what specifically happens in the middle of August. But, you see, if it were Israel in the middle of August that would take some even more drastic, unusually drastic action,
right,
then I would expect to see this dynamic around the North Node or the Sun or another element in the Israeli chart. But to see it on the South Node, I find exceptionally troubling, because that indicates that, in my mind, and again I want to hear your view, but in my mind that indicates something that's very unfortunate for Israel. Now, we all know how Israel is going to react if something very unfortunate happens for Israel. So they're already taking military action. And let's be honest, I know that some dreadful things happen in Israel because of, you know, suicide bombings. We've seen these dreadful occurrences. We know that it's unacceptable that rockets are being fired from Gaza by Hamas into Israel, and we know that people have died that way. But it feels to me, looking at the charts and the information that we have, that the event in Israel would be far more unfortunate. And my big concern is also, well, when something very, very unfortunate happens, how on earth will the Israelis react to that? So over to you, Stephen, because I really want to hear your view on what's likely to occur in Israel, given that we're dealing with the South Node, a triggering of the South Node.
Yes. Well, the middle of August is indeed going to be quite busy for Israel, because, you know, not only is Mars transiting that very sensitive 11-degree Scorpio point, which was the location of an eclipse prior to this. Not only is Mars transiting that point, he's also conjuncting Israel's natal south node, as you mentioned. But also Saturn in Scorpio, to me, looks problematic, because Saturn has recently has turned direct again. He's stationed. He's going backwards right now. He's retrograde, and pretty soon he's going to turn direct. So he's going to become, I suppose you could say, more increased and focused in his function. You see, and at 17 degrees of Scorpio, he's
where is he? So I was just going to say, where is he? Where is Saturn in? Oh yeah, Saturn is he's hanging around progressed Chiron.
Yeah, well, he's also he's squaring.
Is Saturn going to go back? Is Saturn going to back up to 13 degrees?
Is it going to back up to 13 degrees? I would have to check on that one and get back to you with that information. Actually, that's something.
I'm just wondering whether Saturn also Saturn's going direct at the moment, isn't it? Is that right? Yes.
Well,
I think it's direct at the moment.
Saturn is.
Or is he retrograde?
No, he's still retrograde. He's slowing down. He's going.
Okay.
He's going to turn direct. He'll be direct by early August. Let's see. Let me subtract some days from this.
So when he goes direct early August, he's going to transit up to Chiron. Chiron in Scorpio in the first house in the Israeli chart. I think that adds to the drama, really.
It adds to the gloom and doom for sure, because Chiron, to my thinking, is associated with those things. But Saturn actually turns direct on the 20th of July. He'll retrograde to 16 degrees of Scorpio and then turn direct. So this is problematic, because there he's in a very tight square with Israel's natal Mars at 16 Leo. Do you see?
Natal Saturn.
Natal Saturn, that's right. Thank you for that. That's what I meant to say.
So that sort of almost tugs it tugs on that square, doesn't it? In August, it's going to pull on that already tense square to the natal Saturn.
Yeah, it's going to definitely activate it, because Saturn in transit is going to carry with it its natal meanings. And looking at Israel's natal Saturn at 16 degrees Leo, this is its natal meaning. Saturn in Leo is first of all, it's debilitated. He's in opposition to the sign that he rules, which is Aquarius. And this is a debility for Saturn. So this harms its function. So this harms the ability if Leo, the sign of Leo represents the king, then Saturn in Leo represents sort of a denial or a rejection of the king. So to my thinking, it could represent a sort of a blockage of the prime minister's impulse or desire to go to war. This could represent a hindrance to hawkish prime ministers like Ariel Sharon. And, it could, because in the natal, Saturn closely follows Pluto. Pluto sort of represents to me the people's power, the people's urge for power, the Plutonian things, which are in Leo. Now let's look at the houses that Saturn rules, which are Capricorn and Aquarius. Here we're talking about the third house and the fourth house. This is very much the public transportation infrastructure of Israel, and very much the homeland, Terra.
And we've got transiting Pluto already, and just for everyone's reference, Pluto is, amongst other things, the modern planet of death, and it's conjunct that progressed moon, the common people, in the third house. So I think you're onto something there, and that so you feel that the unfortunate event could well be associated with transportation.
Well, I definitely do. I mean, also Pluto is also, not only is he conjunct the progressed moon in the third house of public transportation, he's also conjunct the natal part of fortune, which is at 11 degrees Capricorn, DC. Part of fortune traditionally represents grace, luck, even monetary gain. And with Pluto conjunct the part of fortune, that sort of, to me, would signify a sort of a stain on like a luck running out type of a situation. I would sort of count it as a negative testimony. Really.
The other thing that concerns me, Stephen, is that when we look at the Israeli chart, and you were talking about Saturn, transiting Saturn, when it goes direct early in August, it's going to pull on that tight square, or more firmly activate that tight square to the natal Saturn, but it is the natal Saturn and the natal Pluto that are in the bends that square the nodal axis in the Israeli chart. So I think that's particularly problematic. But also, even now, transiting Jupiter is conjunct Israel's progressed sun, and we know that Jupiter has an expansive effect. So the Israelis are feeling quite bold at the moment. They feel like taking action, and they feel brave. And the news reports I was looking at this afternoon were saying that the Israeli people are pushing on the government to take very firm action against Hamas.
Well, what's also interesting here is that I think what's really going to perturb that configuration, where we have transiting Saturn interacting with the nodal axis, the natal nodal axis, and also squaring very tightly his natal spot. In addition to that, we have the moon that is going to be conjuncting Uranus prior to the 15th. Actually, it's going to happen, I do believe, on the 14th. And while it's doing that, it's going to be also very tightly trining that natal Saturn. This is a very compelling and stimulating planetary picture that we have going on here. You see, because I would expect a lot of times with this sort of work, you see that the sort of, I would expect because see the faster moving bodies such as the moon, these are going to act sort of as the timers.
Final triggers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like the energies build, isn't it? So we've made different observations about different configurations in the chart, but everything's happening at the same time. It's a question of loading, isn't it, really? And then it gets triggered by the moon, ultimately triggers something.
Yes, the moon, they're representing the people, the masses, the commoners, as it were. And, around 8 o'clock on the evening of the 14th, the moon is going to be conjunct, partile conjunct, meaning that to the exact degree it's going to become a conjunct with Uranus. And while this is happening, it's going to be a trining. Uranus and Moon are going to be trining that natal Saturn. Now,
that is 18th of August.
14th of August. It's right.
14th. Okay.
Right. And now the moon conjunct Uranus. This is going to represent, for the Israeli people as a whole, a very pungent emotional desire for freedom. They want to be free of fear, and they're going to have a compulsive need for something very unusual. You see, something over the top. It's going to be, something designed to permanently quell the argument. They're going to want it to be sudden. You see,
and that Uranus is in opposition to Jupiter, isn't it?
Yes,
so
it is.
That point that's being triggered in the middle of August.
Now, the whole of this is going to be trining Saturn. It's going to be making the Israeli people feel very isolated from the world, because you can imagine that there's been sort of an uproar of condemnation coming from the civilized world against this entire thing. And so, to my thinking, Moon conjunct Uranus in trine to Saturn represents, that old R&B song, just the two of us.
Well, also, do you think that because of... Well, really, I don't think that if you were to ask the Israelis in a private conversation that would never hit the airwaves, whether they feel the Obama administration has... And I'm not saying I'm not making an observation purely about Obama, but about the way we've managed relations with the Middle East and Israel in the last few years, or last several years. If you were to ask them, do you feel that your ally, the United States, has been particularly supportive of Israel in the last several years? I'm not sure they would be overly enthusiastic about our support.
Oh, for sure, no. My take on the matter is that they would almost without fail speak out with contempt and condemnation for our support. And I'll tell you some of the reason I have
in private.
Yeah, in their private conversation.
In private. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Because wouldn't you really be saying, well, hey, thanks, you came in and did what you did in Iraq, and that was good, but then you left and you've pulled out of Afghanistan as well. Nothing was done about the civil war in Syria. Now we've got the situation with ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Now we've got the situation with Iran probably looking at how they can more heavily support Iraq, or the Shia in Iraq, and also how they can potentially take advantage of the utter chaos in the Middle East. And here we are. And we feel very alone. I think that's what they would say. But the other thing, Stephen, is the Israelis... I don't know. I think what we're looking at here is the Israelis taking some very significant action, maybe because there's so much chaos in the Middle East. There's so much going on that perhaps it would be easier to do what they would plan to do than it would be if there wasn't we weren't under so much pressure in other parts of the Middle East.
Yeah, well, for sure. There's definitely, as far as I'm concerned, written right into the natal figure of almost an archetypal permanent dissatisfaction with foreign help. Because the ninth house, which represents foreign aid, as it were, or foreigners in general, it's the 12th house to the 10th. So this would represent sort of the downfall or the self-undoing of the 10th, which is the Israeli prime minister. So to my thinking, this sort of represents the natural friction. The ninth house and the 10th house, they're in a semi-sextile aspect to each other, which is an aspect of friction. It's a 30-degree aspect. And it's in Cancer, which is intimately tied to America, because America's sun, its president, is in Cancer. Notice, but in Israel's chart, let's look at that. We have Venus, Islam, is in Cancer in the ninth house. So this is what prevents the American president from fully engaging with Israel and according them all sorts of even more diplomatic benefits, because Venus is in the ninth house.
Oh, do you know what is also very important here, Stephen?
What's that?
I would just run a quinquy wheel. So just for everybody that's listening, in effect, what Stephen and I are doing is we're looking at charts. Obviously, you know that we're looking at astrology charts, and we're in some cases we'll say to you, well, we're comparing this nation with that nation, and in that instance we may be looking at the two natal charts for those nations side by side. So we call that synastry, and we'd say, well, this is a bi-wheel because it has two charts. What I've just pulled up, Stephen, is a quinquy wheel. So for everybody listening, it's 5 wheels, and it involves the natal figure for Israel, progressed, what's going on now, and then the same for the United States. And what I saw, Stephen, I think is really significant, is that the progressed moon in the US chart will also be at that point. It's already, the US progressed moon is already at 10 degrees of Scorpio. It is already positioned at the south node in the Israeli chart, and hence it will also be triggered by Mars, or stimulated by Mars in the middle of August. So whatever happens heavily involves the US. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely agree, because unfortunately it's not like we can just say to Israel, okay, we're no longer going to play ball, because unfortunately that's not going to be an option.
And Stephen, also the transiting south node is conjunct the US progressed Venus. We're very much drawn into whatever's going on in the middle of August.
Yes, we're not going to be able to avoid it, because in addition to a very strong, I suppose you would say, pro-Israel lobby, there are also the fundamentalist Christians who without hesitation support Israel to the tune of several $billions a year. Now, I'm pretty convinced that in those hypothetical private conversations we speculated upon, that there would be also a sort of sneering contempt for these donations, because I tell you, Christianity is certainly not really allowed to operate freely. You can go to jail for ministering in the nation of Israel. If you pass out, your Gideon Bibles or your tracts or whatever, you can find yourself behind bars. That's illegal over there. But nevertheless, fundamentalist Christians in America who represent an important political bloc here, they are very much concerned about what's going on there. Many of them have feelings of apocalyptic angst.
Yes.
Do you see?
Some of my neighbors do.
Absolutely.
Some of them are stockpiling food, and I live in East Tennessee. You hear that from people.
By all means, here's a company for everybody to invest in. Post haste, Tinfoil Hat Inc. Okay, they have an IPO.
Hey, isn't that is an entity that will be belong to Metaphysical Media LLC, isn't it?
Of course, absolutely.
It would be a winner. It would be a winner. I could sell them in my neighborhood.
I'll tell you something, Steve. There's a thread of commonality within the various conspiracy theories,
there is.
They're called. And that thread is, hey, there's smoke, so there must be fire. Mm-hmm. Something is wrong. I don't recognize my elected officials anymore, so therefore they're reptilians or lizard people. Hey, I'm cool with that. I get the metaphor. It's fine.
But I see what I agree with you in that. I read a lot, Stephen, like you do. I'm open-minded. I listen to what people say, even if they sound crazy. But no matter how wild some of the suggestions are, there is always smoke. There is.
Right.
There's no smoke without fire. So it may be a slightly dumbed-down version of some of the things certain people are saying, but there's a thread between all of the different theories as well. But Stephen, what is worrying here, looking at these charts, this Quincke wheel, is that Jupiter, that day, just generally speaking, Jupiter will be in the bends, just in terms of transiting planets.
Yeah.
Jupiter's going to be in the bends.
That's unfortunate.
That is unfortunate. That's the word, isn't it? That's unfortunate.
Yeah. Jupiter's ability to help out here is going to be severely impeded because of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because of this interaction with the nodal axis. When Jupiter goes wrong, it can be a situation either of, all hope dying, or it could be a situation of, I'm God and I'm about to mess you up. Do you see what I mean? It can go either way. It can swing to either pole here. But the one thing about the nodal axis that always seems to be certain is that it has a public quality to it. It's not going to be something going on behind the scenes. And there's the idea of relationship with the nodal axis. You see, so that I agree is going to be an influence that pulls America into this. It's pretty scary, actually. It has the potential to ignite a conflagration of nationalist sentiment in the area, and what we have here are two fixed forces opposing each other. Two dogs, one bone, and both dogs are pretty nasty in this fight. They're both determined to get the bone.
Yeah. Well, when you progress the Palestinian chart and the US chart together, you actually end up with progressed Saturn in the US chart conjunct Palestine's progressed descendant.
Mm.
So that's astro speak, I guess, for the fact that the US stance is not really going to benefit Palestine.
No,
realistically speaking.
No, I don't think, even despite our best efforts, no matter the billions of dollars we funnel into this conflict, I don't really see that they'll help, simply because of the dynamics of the charts here that I'm looking at. I mean, if we look again at the chart for the Middle East mandate, it's the sign of Cancer is emphasized in its chart. So whether we like it or not, our actions are actually going to benefit, accidentally or otherwise. It's going to actually benefit the opponents of Israel, which we've done historically in the past, whether we like it or not. We have a habit of our diplomatic mistakes coming back to bite us in the rear end. The conspiracy theory literature is replete with the very real claims that the CIA or America trained the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, trained the leadership of Al Qaeda, and it's really no secret that the United States was active in the Iranian politics, fomenting rebellion there. So.
Unfortunately, though, our stance has changed so much over time. 1 minute we're friends with this leader and this nation, and then a decade or two later we're ousting them. You know that transiting Pluto is in opposition to the Sun at 13 degrees Cancer in the US chart, natal chart, Stephen. So I think that means, you can't win. And also that transiting Pluto is squaring Saturn in the US natal chart, and that US Saturn is opposed by Uranus, transiting Uranus. The US, I really think that in all of this, Palestine, Iraq, Syria, Israel, and sadly I think Egypt as well in time, and we said that we'd check in on Egypt.
Right.
But basically these dynamics with the US chart, to me, say whichever way we turn, we can't win here. We're just embroiled in. It's like trying to hold treacle in your hand, basically, isn't it? It's like we're. What do we do? What do we do? It's like somebody's just grabbed you by the balls and isn't letting go.
Treacle.
It's Pluto opposition the Sun. That's rough. And also, it causes me to call. Does it mean for Obama? Because Obama's on your second time. He's the president. That's the exact opposition to challenging the Sun. It's interesting to see. It'll be very interesting to see how all of this unfolds and what impact it has upon Obama and the U.S.
I got to tell you, man, honestly, the way I see this Sun-Pluto opposition, I see it is going to be a challenge. I feel the president is going to feel an intense desire to transform this entire situation. I really do feel as if he's going to see establishing peace in the Mideast, sort of, to coin a slogan from the 80s, a cliche from the 80s. If he can be the one to affect that, I think that would be a very an attractive notch on his belt. So
Would you think he possibly could, with Pluto in opposition to the Sun in the U.S.
No,
chart?
I don't think he can. However, I think the line in the sand will be drawn. However, in other words, I think that will be the motivation. I think the president will be motivated to regenerate peace in a way, transform the situation, or it could be a desire to destroy as well. You know, Pluto's face can be one of regeneration and transformation, or it could also be the face of destruction. That sort of power, or it could represent not so much a desire for it or a rejection of it when it's gone after. It could represent the experience of it. You know, the experience of power, the experience of destruction or regeneration of his own office somehow. Any of these things are possible.
We did say that we'll talk a lot more about the U.S., the outlook for the U.S. and the stock markets and things like that. But, you know, looking at this dynamic with Israel and Palestine and then pulling the U.S. chart into the picture, and I was looking at the Sibley chart with Sagittarius rising,
right.
I look at that and think, let's not lose sight of the fact that there's trouble brewing at home, because Pluto opposition to the Sun, that's huge in itself. The South Node right now is conjunct Venus in the US chart. Uranus is transiting Uranus is conjunct Chiron. Neptune's approaching the progressed Sun, and we've got transiting Pluto square. Transiting, let me see, 1, 2. No, we've got Pluto squaring natal Saturn, haven't we? Yeah.
Well, how far from being exact? What's the orb on the Sun and contact with the progressed Neptune?
I've got it here in front of me as Pluto. Transiting Pluto is at 12 degrees and 7 minutes of Capricorn right now, and the US Sun is at 13 degrees 18 minutes of Cancer. So it hasn't tightened up yet, but it's going to. And Pluto after that, or actually at the same time, Pluto will be squaring the natal Saturn, and then it's going to tighten up on the natal Saturn in the US chart, and then after that it's going to move in and square the progressed Mars in the natal chart. We've got Uranus hovering around Chiron, and Neptune's at 7 degrees Pisces, and the progressed Sun in the US chart is at 9 degrees Pisces.
Yeah.
So there are some very troubling dynamics here, and I don't think we should lose sight of these challenges. I mean, if you were sitting with a client looking at this U.S. chart with progressed and transits, I don't think we'd be saying, oh, you know, you're just going to have the most wonderful couple of years and you're going to fall in love and your finances are going to do well, and of course there's going to be a promotion and your kids are going to buy you that wonderful new surround sound system you've always wanted. This is a mess.
Yeah, what I would tell that hypothetical client is that, yeah, okay, for sure, you're about to become a radically different person. You're about to undergo a transformation. However, with this 90-degree contact, with this square between Saturn and Pluto, the transformation is going to deal with something shrinking, with things hardening. Do you see? Yeah, the circumstances in your life are going to become more and more restrictive. Now, applying this to the Sibley chart, you know, if this were my hypothetical client, I would say that the shrinking, the hardening would be within the realm of finances because of the interplay of the second and the 11th house. And also in this chart, Saturn is a symbol of currency, of the coin of the realm. Coming into contact with Pluto in this way, what we're looking at is a severe challenge to the strength of the national currency, a hardening of it. Do you see? And it's going to transform, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because we're dealing in an age when the whole notion of currency is going to undergo a facelift. We experienced a paradigm shift with the advent of the internet and the popularization of it, I should say, in the late 90s. That lifted humanity into another era, another age of development. Now this is going to be visibility.
Of strangely, Stephen, it's a dichotomy of visibility and I see the internet as this dichotomy between visibility and control.
Right.
My visibility of what's going on in the world, as much as you can trust what you're being told by the media, and there are certain sources that I absolutely distrust, and there are other sources that I pay more attention to. I really feel like you have to dig around in order to get to something that's relatively close to the truth. But we have, as citizens, as individuals, we have greater visibility, let's face it, around the world because of the internet. But also, we're affected by greater control over us because of all these issues with the NSA and spying, and now, you know, the second spy in Germany's been kicked out of Germany, and as you said, I'm not sure whether you said it earlier in the show or you said it to me on the pre-show conference call, but the Germans are saying, well, they may now need to start spying on the US.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like nobody, even friends don't trust each other. And friends don't, it's like you and I not being able to trust each other. It's like you and I saying we're friends and we're colleagues and getting to the point where I say, well, you know, Stephen, I have to start checking on what you're up to because although you're my friend and we have this show together, your behavior's not good and I have to look out for myself. It's just unbelievable. But Stephen, going back to the US chart, and again, I want your view on this because when you look at the US chart and you look at the transits, you find that Venus, progressed Venus, in the US chart at 24 degrees of Aries is now in the bends in the US chart. It's moved and it's in the bends. So I think that having a conversation about, well, what specifically does Venus represent in the US chart is important because it's in the bends.
Right.
And not only that, but the transiting nodes are conjunct that Venus, that progressed Venus at 24 degrees Aries, which means that the transiting lunar nodes are squaring the natal nodal axis in the US charts. I mean, what the hell?
Well, you know, the nodes are interesting in the American chart, and you know, with Venus conjuncting the nodal axis, or with Venus being in the bends rather, progressed Venus, that's also going to represent a sort of difficulty in the financial realm, but in this time I think oriented toward the idea of exploration for some resource. You know, it's interesting, a lot of how many primary directions sort of time out when the node is directed to the ascendant, for example, or things of that nature, then it sort of times out expansions of American territory and expansive attitudes such as the California gold rush, for example. But however, I think the problem is that there's going to be a challenge to fund this expansion, and I think
let's hope it's a challenge to fracking because the fracking thing just makes me laugh. They're saying now that lots of earthquakes in Oklahoma and Texas and wherever else are because of fracking. You just feel like saying, "Oh, really? What a surprise!" Do you not think that if somebody got a pressure washer and busted a load of your left nostril, then it might cause you a sinus problem?
Yeah, I mean, there's an appalling lack of accountability.
Yeah.
In a lot of these industries.
Implementing stupid decisions.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. Because you know what?
Well, Hillary's listening, so we've got her ear.
Well, I'll tell you what. Since I've got her ear, I would tell her this: instead of assigning financial incentives and financial gain through evil things, isn't there a way we can sort of socially engineer incentive to be gotten from the good? Can't we incentivize benevolent things instead of attaching profit? I mean, we've chosen to attach profit to war, to violence, to a weapon. The only function of a rifle is to punch holes in meat and to stop it. That's what a rifle or a pistol is for. We've attached profit to war in many, many complex ways, and this has been a habit of America since going back to its early days. You see, so the transit of Pluto that we were referencing here is going to be pretty significant because it's going through Capricorn. Capricorn, by its nature, represents concentrated wealth. This will be the entity that gets attacked. Right now, the attitude toward the super rich is shifting. There's probably a fervor against people who accumulate and display massive amounts of wealth. People like that would probably do well to study the French Revolution, the Bolshevik adventures in the early.
I know, and we're all supposed to look up to these people. We're all supposed to. If you've got billions and billions, and I'm sure that there are the people out there that've got a lot of money. That I've got nothing against people having money, Stephen. I've got nothing against them, and I teach a class how to create thriving spiritual business, and it has a section about money. And because I actually say to people on the class, don't think that you can't have money if you want to pursue a spiritual career or a spiritual business. Don't think that because you want to help people and heal people and provide insight to people that you need to struggle financially. It's a return on energy, and ultimately what you choose to do with it is what's important. So if you get filthy rich,
absolutely,
you can decide to be, to use it inappropriately, or you can donate an absolute fortune or give everything to a wonderful, wonderful cause. But as a society, we just look up to money and people that have a lot of money, no matter how they're behaving or what kind of character they have. I gave a talk at a juvenile detention facility earlier this week, and I was talking to these kids. There must have been about 25 of them to 30 of them, and I was talking for 2 hours. And I found it fascinating because I could see the good in each of these kids. I could see the good. I even saw the good, Stephen, in a kid that said to me, "I burn down houses so that people know about me."
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah, it is. And I said to him in front of all these other guys, "You do that because you don't feel listened to, you don't feel that you count, you don't feel valued." And so you think that by doing something quick and easy, like torching a property, you're going to be known and people are going to respect you. And I actually said, really, you're not going to be well remembered for that kind of stuff because people don't keep back issues of Just Busted. And people are probably lining their cat litter trays with your face right as we speak.
Yeah, most shops are hot right now.
Yeah, and you may as well do something worthwhile, something beneficial for the world, and have people actually remember you for doing something good. But I went off at a tangent because these kids said to me, "What kind of car do you drive? How much do you earn?" And I looked at them and said, "Why is this important? Why is this important to you? Why is this important to you? Does it matter? Are you going to judge me not based upon what I'm saying and the fact that I'm donating time to be here? You want to assess me based on what I earn and which car I'm driving? Are you for real?" And they all sort of went quiet because I think it's a very important point. But Stephen, I'm worried about the US. The more we talk about this, the more I look at the chart, the more concerned I feel, because when I look at the progressions for the United States, there's a progressed square between the midheaven and Uranus that peaked just a couple of weeks ago. So it will be triggered. There's also a progression that peaked a couple of weeks ago, a semi-square between Mars and Saturn. And those progressions combined with, there's one Mars to the midheaven, there's another one Mercury, semi-square, Saturn, there's another one coming up that's peaking midheaven, contraparallel Mars. I don't feel, it doesn't comfort me.
No, a lot of.
And I wonder whether we're underestimating actually. And I'm not somebody that tries to be a scaremonger. I'm not doing that. But as we look at this and I feel into it, I feel increasingly uncomfortable about the United States. So I was going to say, what if would you be comfortable pulling a few tarot cards?
Sure.
And asking them the question, well, what guidance can you give us about our concerns as we look at the astrological dynamics for the United States? And this is interesting because we weren't planning to talk a lot about the US, but the discussion about Israel and comparing the Israeli progressions and with the US progressions, natal chart, etc., and then doing the same with Palestine has led us to say, well, hold on, the US chart's not looking so happy right now.
Yes, let's see. Let me compare that spread right now. I'm using the Brotherhood of Light Egyptian tarot deck for this analysis. And we'll see. We'll see what we need to know the most in order to avoid.
And you see what, Stephen, again going back to that, the moon, the progressed moon's at 10 degrees Scorpio. Therefore, the eclipse that we've been talking about so much was conjunct the moon, the common people in the 11th house, and that will be triggered by Mars in the middle of August as well.
Right. Now,
Stephen, I'm thinking that, if I were ISIS, if I were one of these extreme terrorists, I'd be thinking, why don't we hit all of these motherfuckers up? Oh, I'm allowed to say that on blog. Oops. If I were one of these dreadful terrorists, I'd probably be thinking, how can we hit them all at the same time?
Yeah, they're ambitious. That's the thing. They are definitely ambitious. They're backed, believe it or not, in their chart. They seem to have a very intense backing among the people. I don't know if this is out of fear and security issues because of their extreme violence, but they are getting a lot of support. They're getting a lot in the way of finances, and to me it looks like they're going to continue to make gains. That's the thing that I'm scared of right now, as far as ISIS is concerned. Now, the challenge from Pluto to America's sun, I think, is going to represent a lack of potency on our part to get entangled in these things, purely because of financial reasons and budgetary reasons.
We're feeling pretty impotent right now, aren't we? Not you and I, but we're as virile as ever. Yes. But the US, the US feels to me quite impotent right now. Yeah, John Kerry's flown over to Afghanistan because of this issue with the election, and I think, well, I'm still upset with him over the whole Syria debacle, but I see him flying in there and stepping off his plane and think, yeah, okay. It doesn't feel virile.
No, I would say that this would be just a situation for us to, I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, we're in it now. The dynamics of the Mideast tensions are such they're locked into place. I'm afraid, I don't mean to be negative about this, but realistically speaking, from a pragmatic perspective, unless some true prophet of God is born there and totally reverses things, then I fully expect the people to behave in a carrot and stick fashion with the dynamics revealed by their individual birth figures. And indeed, for each country, there's a handful of different charts, and what we try to do with these charts is capture the folk soul, the soul of the people, as they evolve through various incarnations of their.
Well, tell us the other version of that word.
Oh, the Germans called it Folkseele. A lot of the
Folkseele.
Yeah, folk soul. A lot of these theories came from. Germany was a veritable font of modern astrological theory, with the Uranian school proposed by Alfred Witte and the cosmobiologists. They really revolutionized astrology. They developed a lot of research into the phenomenal tool of midpoints and midpoint analysis. And they then theorized the trans-Neptunian hypothetical planets like Admetos and Apollon and Hades, Zeus, etc. They introduced the 90-degree and 360-degree dials, which are really, really important tools to help you see those tricky aspects like the sesquiquadrate, and the quincunx.
Who introduced the slinky? That thing that sort of client walks down the stairs. Where did that come from?
That was Pee Wee Herman. So he developed it initially as a way to sort of get into pornographic theaters without being noticed. He wanted to dodge the doorman and pay the fee. So he developed a slinky, but it was too big and he scaled it down. So
okay.
He never got credited for that. Now, you said to do a tarot spread based on this question. I wanted to actually do that, and I have a 4-card spread here. One representing the general definition of the question, the subject, why we're here consulting the tarot. Then the other card representing what to avoid. This is what we need to know to avoid in order to sort of get the best result out of these troublesome pending transits and what they signify for our economy, for our diplomatic relations, etc. And the third card shows more positively what we should do. So essentially what we're doing here is defining a negative and defining a positive. Avoid this, do that. And then the fourth card is going to show the outcome. And so it's, I'll say right off the bat that with the 8 of the earth element showing the outcome, it seems as if we're destined to get sort of some egg on our face here in a major way. The number 8 is going to refer to the government in this tarot deck, because the 8 is associated with Capricorn and Trump number 8, which is the balance, and Capricorn symbolizes the government, concentrated power. And of course the association of Saturn into this is going to sort of bring in a traditional misfortune. One of the keywords one of the keyword concepts for this card is a slur on the reputation, so to speak. You see, or getting fired, termination of employment. So that could also be the result in terms of, hey, we need a regime change in Congress. We need to clean house, perhaps, with our politicians, and as an electorate, we need to choose politicians who are more efficient, instead of wasteful, perhaps, or even downright tolerant of wicked behavior on our part. Because I'm going to tell you something, Steve. As a citizen of this country, I'm ashamed of my country's behavior in Germany. We were a guest in that country, and we behaved contrary to the way a guest should behave in someone else's house. I'm ashamed of that behavior.
Towards a friend as well.
Towards a friend.
It's not like you were just randomly staying in somebody's house. They're actually supposed to be your friend.
I want to say to the tens of millions of Germans who are listening to me right now that
Angela Merkel included, because I think Hillary mentioned the show.
Yeah, she probably did.
They're good, and it's a great way of actually getting insight to use.
I just want to say I was raised better than that. You know what I'm saying? The American tradition is completely contrary. Well, the pure American tradition is contrary to that sort of behavior. But of course, we have a long history of espionage in our country.
You know, did you watch the TV series? Oh, what was it called? It was the Netflix series about politics.
Probably not.
It was House of Cards.
I've heard about it, but it
was brilliant. And Hillary Clinton made a comment that she watched the whole series, I think, in one sitting with Bill Clinton. And that program really reveals how dirty and nasty politics is. And when she made that comment, I thought, I'm not sure in your position I would want to mention that I was interested in the House of Cards.
Right.
And also, it makes you wonder. I was thinking, well, is it really that bad? Is politics really this bad? And I think in the US it is. It's really been modeled on ancient Rome, the Roman Republic, and unfortunately, we see parallels between these two republics very clearly. However, America hasn't achieved anywhere near the longevity of the Roman Empire just yet. But we're still behaving in a way that the Romans did just prior to the fall. And it's interesting to note that Rome fell. Rome, the pinnacle of civilization, fell to barbarians, rednecks. Seriously, well, I mean, I don't mean to say that, actually. The German civilizations that invaded Rome were actually quite organized. They had an excellent army. So, I mean, referring to them as barbarians is really adopting a Roman or Latinate bias, a historical bias, because the people they labeled barbarians, the Celts, the Gauls, the Franks, etc., these people were actually quite ingenious and they were incredibly warlike. They overran Rome. To make a modern analogy, it would be like the lower classes rising up here in America and taking over the suburbs. It would be a nightmare, and that's what happened in Rome. And they displayed a lot of the same traits that we're displaying as a civilization in terms of the corrupt politics, a politics that it was thoroughly wedded to financial gain instead of advancing the benefit of the people. And also an impotent people, an impotent or at the very least a weakened electorate. Now it's kind of hard to arouse people to get off the couch and go vote. And I think I've never been anywhere. I don't think I know. I've never lived anywhere and observed such distrust of government.
Yeah,
the people I know. I'd be hard pressed to find an American that would say to me, "Oh no, I think our government represents us. I think we can trust our government," or even find somebody that says, "Oh, I trust our government with our safety."
Yes, because one, I wish I could remember his name. A military advisor. He said once that it's impossible for two countries to have self-interests that are mutual, to have mutual interests that coincide. Such a situation is impossible. And, for some reason, American involvement in Middle Eastern politics does not seem to follow a trajectory of what's in the best interest of the people. So this Pluto transit that we've been talking about, one reason I think it's going to be revolutionary in its scope is because it's going to transform the American currency. I think we're going to see a surge in popularity of alternate currencies like Bitcoin, which are like, we mentioned Bitcoin in the last in our last show, but the concept of Bitcoin is going to liberate the financial picture in America. That's very much in line with the transformation aspect of Pluto, and it's very much in line with the sort of emasculating effect of what's going to happen to the government in terms of Pluto representing corruption. Well, I think it's going to be a house cleaning period, because all of a sudden, what on earth, wow, what can Bitcoin do to political influence in Washington? Maybe it can nullify it, or maybe not. Maybe it could be used for criminal purposes. I think we have that choice. But for sure, the transit of Pluto to natal Saturn through Capricorn, about to conjunct its natal place, for sure, this is probably going to signify a radical transformation of the American dollar, either in the form of digitized currency such as Bitcoin, or in the form of a merged currency, a la the Amero. Now, pardon me while I go projectile vomit and soil myself, because I tell you what, the concept of the Amero makes me want to, simultaneously. Well, never mind. It's disgusting to me. I don't want an Amero, but hey.
I'm not sure we want to align ourselves with European economic policy, to be quite honest. I'm not overly impressed with the recovery or lack thereof.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it would be like, being a castaway on a desert island and drinking your strained urine because it's the only thing to drink. It would be our concepts coming back to us because the euro, the European Union is itself, if I'm not mistaken, sort of a republic-esque sort of political structure wherein we have sort of like a United States of Europe, whereas we have a centralized currency, et cetera, et cetera. It's a different. Sure, I'm sure there are superficial differences, and I'm by no means an expert on the European Union. But to me, it just seems to be like meet the old boss, same as the new boss, quite frankly. And I would expect to see the same thing at some point happen in South America as well. There's a very keenly developed anti-American sentiment in South America simply because, there's some, a reactionary sort of, you gringos think you're tough. Well, we can do good things with our economy as well. We can do this and that. There's that sort of competitive spirit. And then on top of that, there's the, I guess what you would call a sort of anti-colonial resentment that dates back to the meddling of the Spaniards in that area. And on top of that, there's sort of a natural tendency of a very highly developed affinity toward leftist politics in Latin America, especially South America. So it's going to be a place to watch, Brazil, especially with their recovering economy. The Brazilian real is enjoying an anniversary now. That currency basically it resurrected the Brazilian economy from a completely parasitic and virulent inflation. And it's celebrating an anniversary. It's been a viable currency that's helping Brazil. So, we're going to see probably increased centralization and consolidation in South America, and probably the same in North America as well. And this is going to irritate and inflame local nationalism on a huge level, in my opinion. It's going to really, people are going to resent things like NAFTA, which is definitely not friendly to the American manufacturer and the American worker. So I think what we're going to see is an increasing spread, an increasing clamor for more insulated American policy. Let's get us first. Let's concentrate on us. So that's going to be represented by the opposition of Pluto to the natal American sun. The president's going to be faced with a popular opposition to certain American policies, I would imagine.
I heard, makes me laugh, that I heard a lady, I didn't hear this. My friend told me that she had a client who said this to her about Obama. This lady said, Obama going to introduce Mexican money.
Yeah. That's very
Fred said to her, what, sorry? Obama going to introduce Mexican money. And she said, really? Why would he do that? And this lady said, don't know, but he's gonna. I'm waiting for them to Mexican currency. I was going to change my rates to Mexican, but I think it's a little bit hasty, isn't it?
Yeah, they would inflate rapidly, probably by a factor of 10 or thereabouts, because unfortunately Latin American politics and economies are notoriously corrupt. There's been popular upheaval to sort of sanitize government structures and economic structures. These things are slow in coming. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is massive down there, and it's
biggest in Russia.
Yeah, it's increasingly being attributed to American capitalist policy as well, instead of basically the poverty in South America is crushing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's incredibly rich. It's just they've definitely got issues about distribution of wealth, as do of course America, and I think that's also going to be encoded in the Pluto transit. How can we distribute our wealth and more sensibly? not necessarily more fairly, or but more sensibly, more effectively, in a way that's going to optimize the good and minimize the bad.
I'd like to see, Steve, if we were two of the wealthiest people in the world, we could have a coffee and say, hey, you know what, if we gave up 80% of this, which we don't need,
well, yeah.
How many problems could we fix for how many people?
It would definitely put a lot of food in a lot of mouths. The thing is, there's probably some funky, highfalutin math that gets involved there, because then I think there might be, and I'm guessing here, a proportional relationship between the bureaucracy of a charity and its size. In other words, I think the effectiveness of the charity would go down the larger that it were. Perhaps more effective might be smaller pods, sort of like charitable Einsatzgruppen. You know what I'm saying? Instead of death squads, the life squad. Smaller groups of charity that go out and do tangible things in various communities. That might actually be a more sensible application of philanthropy, because I think maybe that corruption factor could be accounted for, could be limited. Do you see?
I'm talking about corruption and nastiness. I wanted us to check in on Nigeria, because before this whole ISIS crisis and the latest Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there was a strong focus on this dreadful terrorist group, Boko Haram, in Nigeria.
Right.
And when I pulled Nigeria's chart, and just for everybody's reference, we don't know what time Nigeria was founded. And in fact, Stephen, when I looked at it, I realized there's some debate about whether Nigeria was, whether the right chart is 1960 or 1963, but there seem to be many suggestions that October 1st, 1960 is the right choice.
Right.
But transiting Pluto's conjunct Saturn in the Nigerian chart, and I think that transiting Pluto conjunct Saturn as an experience, as a phenomenon, is certainly aligned with the dreadful activities of Boko Haram.
Yes, I absolutely do. As I agree with you on that, because I'll tell you what, that a big part of what we do is look for these sensitive degree areas, because those operate sort of like those magical hinges. They're very important connecting points in chart synastry. And to me, it seems very sensible that Boko Haram would infiltrate into Israel. Israel's already that's another humanitarian sort of crisis, or a humanitarian.
That group terrifies me. When you see, Stephen, the video of the leader of Boko Haram in Nigeria, have you seen the photographs of him?
No, I haven't actually. I have no idea what he looks like. I'm sure he's probably pretty.
He's just terrifying. It's like the devil incarnate.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. That's probably a pretty good PR campaign, and you know what? I can imagine that it's also not just a PR campaign. I can imagine it's also like the reality of that individual. I really do think God. I mean, in the Shacharis morning prayers that Jews pray in the morning, part of it, there's a section where you thank God for certain things that you're not. And if I would pray that prayer in the morning, it would be thank you God that I was not born in Nigeria, and therefore under the influence of such soulless group of brainless automatons.
Yeah, the other big problem though in Nigeria is the effectiveness of the government to actually do anything.
Yeah, it suffers from a lot of the same maladies as the rest of Africa. Rampant inflation because of inept economic policies. Yeah, I'm talking specifically about the rather optimistic economic policies of what was it, Zimbabwe, that had something like the 500 gazillion Googleplex dollar bill. You know what I mean? So African economics is very interesting and fluid, because Africa is obviously a place that where investments are going to continue to pour, being as it is a hive of vital resources. And
I thought Africa was owned by the Chinese now.
Well, that's
part of China, pretty much.
That's also the hot concept going these days, that the Chinese are sort of operating clandestinely, or not so secretly, maybe, but they're gobbling up huge swaths of the country to get their hands on the resources. Now, in my opinion, I think a consolidation of American power and resources right now is probably a pretty good idea, because to me it seems as if China is pretty much the competitor extraordinaire, if you know what I'm saying. Especially in any alliance or commingling of goals with Russia, that could be quite hairy. China has some beef with the U.S. because of the Boxer Rebellion and other things like that probably managed to humiliate a people who are renowned for their pride and holding grudges and settling honor, I guess. And so they're someone to watch. And if it's true that they are gobbling up all these physical resources in Africa, I think that's something that we should be addressing. We can't let that happen. Because
we're used to gobbling them up, aren't we?
Right. Well, I mean,
there's a gobbling up competition.
Yeah, I suppose that's a very good question. Obviously the nations who own the resources should have access to them, and the resources.
So there's a concept.
Yeah. The resources should be put on the free market in a sane and moral fashion, in a way that benefits the originators of those resources. I'm totally down with that, for sure. But a lot of these regimes in Africa, they can't govern their way out of a wet paper bag. And if it's a question of the resources falling in the hands of competitors, then we're sort of straight-jacketed into a position. Then we have to act sensibly. Then we have to ask ourselves, hey man, is our altruism perhaps getting in our way here? Because I'll tell you something. There's a certain amount of doo-doo in the universe, okay, and somebody's going to get it. The question is it going to be us or them? Is it going to be me or someone else? My chart, sometimes I moan and cry about how it looks like God got a bloody nose and used my natal chart as a snot rag. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, why so many squares, God? What did I ever do to you?
But squares are brilliant if you work them.
Oh man, well they've been working me. Okay, now I'm 38 years old now, so I'm learning how to work them. Okay, I'm getting on top of them and maximizing their potential. But still, though, they're difficult. But my thing is, somebody's got to get it, because mathematically speaking, it's a reality that X amount of crap is going to happen. That's sort of by definition required. That's the law. That's the occult law of polarity. You see, so if X amount of goodness is going to happen, your nearest and dearest son going to college and taking up medicine, winning the lottery, etc., then by definition, X amount of utter and complete poop has to happen. A cancer notice, or a school shooting, or what have you. There's a balance of these things.
I was speaking with some. I watched a presentation. There was a presentation at the Healing Center this evening, and there was a number over the weekend about health. And I embarrassingly could only stay for the first 5 minutes because I had to leave to come and do the Psychic Access show and then this show. It was fascinating, but something that was presented telling us the cancer statistics, the rise in cancer statistics. There's a point in time not too far away when 1 in 2 women will experience cancer.
I've heard
something like 1 in 3 men. I mean, it's unbelievable, and it's to do with the foods, the pollutions, the chemicals, the stress.
Yeah, I definitely have heard those statistics as well. And, I think it's really interesting studying planetary cycles. There's the attempt to correlate them with natural cycles of diseases, of which cancer obviously is among the most attention-catching.
I think we're responsible for it, though.
Well, certainly we are. A lot of these cancers are behavioral and ecological in their scope, in their etiology, in their foundation. We know where these things are coming from. Children are being born without eyes, or children and children are being born with all sorts of deficiencies. People are getting the short end of the stick sometimes with vaccines that go wrong. Hey, how about that? There's a show idea for you. Instead of cops gone wrong or wives gone wrrong, how about vaccines gone wrong?
Or here's one. How about vaccines deliberately gone wrong?
About vaccines, yeah, that's another issue as well.
I'm not sure. I'm not saying that that's the case, but I do tell you this, Stephen, for our millions of viewers, I really want them to look up Rima Labo on YouTube. Her first name is Rima, and M for Mike in the middle. People always think of saying N. I say M. I don't know why. And it's really funny. Whenever I call anyone in the States and they ask my address, and I say the word golf, they always think I'm saying golf. Everybody, every time they type golf, I want to know it's golf.
Yeah.
And they go, yeah, golf. No, golf. Yeah. But I'm rambling. Yeah, everyone should check out Rima Labo, Laibow, and on YouTube. She is amazing. She has a couple of interviews or presentations on there. I really encourage everyone to check those out. I'm not saying that I concur with everything she's saying, but find her a very intelligent, very well-informed lady who seems to speak a lot of sense. But Stephen, just before we leave Nigeria, I feel that the first half of 2016 is rough for Nigeria.
Yeah,
so we said we'd try and highlight hotspots. We're going to call them hotspots in the book because I really like that, hotspots. I always think the book should be called Hotspots.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely identify where they're at. One important tool in doing this sort of astrology is using astrocartographs, which really help to localize some of the more important conflagrations that we're talking about. Especially, for example, with eclipses, it becomes important to know what territory was affected by the eclipse. From where was the eclipse visible? These questions become pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Should we take a look at Germany and the United States, given the issues with spying?
Sure.
It might be interesting to check in briefly on Germany and the United States, a comparison of their charts progressed. Because I think it's great to just show people or explain to people that are listening, Hillary included, that the astrological dynamics they tell the story as well. They show us what's happening. That's what's happening is mirrored astrologically. But I think, Stephen, it's really important that people understand this, that although we're working a lot with, or mostly here with astrology, that we use a number of other tools in our private practices and consulting work. But I want to make it really clear, and I know we've said it before, but I don't think it can be said too many times. People shouldn't believe that life is fatalistic because astrology reflects what's occurring. The energies always express themselves, but where our free will comes in is how we work with those energies to create outcomes. And I think we talked last week, didn't we, about how difficult it is to influence a collective entity. How do you influence a nation? But when you're working with a client and you're educating a client about what's on the horizon for them energetically, they can make changes, they can project good energy, make good choices, and mold outcomes.
Oh, absolutely. They can, choose the right time, the most propitious time to begin an enterprise or things of that nature. It can be used as an investigation tool to understand the competition better as well. That is also a very fruitful exercise, without doubt. And looking at a sun history between Germany and the America, the U.S. chart, we see that stellium in Cancer in America's chart is in the 12th house of Germany's natal chart as well. So there seems to be some espionage written right there on the tin, as it were.
Yeah, so maybe, Angela Merkel's listening, as we said, because Hillary tipped her off about our show and how useful it was to politicians. So maybe the thing Angela should be thinking about is why they never used an astrologer, because if they had, the astrologer would have said, watch out, the US is watching you.
Right.
Because they've got this cluster of planets in your house of secret enemies or of espionage.
Well, see, I think getting astrologers involved in public in public affairs, the affairs of the people, affairs of government, it's a double-edged sword, because certainly it would be nice for the government to consult us on these things, to get insight into diplomatic allies and opponents, to get insight into certain domestic civil movements, a la the Tea Party or what have you. So it would be nice to see that sort of activity happening, but by the same token, we can easily see astrology being used and perverted for immoral things.
You make a good point, and we talked briefly about this. You and I talked briefly about it in terms of consulting work, because we're going to have to make decisions about who we do and do not want to consult for, because, as you said, we could be providing information, and we do provide information, but you don't always know how that information is going to be used. So it is a double-edged sword. We have to think about that more and more. I've been in Germany. I think very interesting that the US Twitter in exact opposition to the planet of freedom and individuality, Uranus, in the German chart.
Right. Yeah.
There's a twining of faith, opportunity, and freedom, but at the same time, it comes at a price. I think that's what this aspect is saying to us.
Yeah, and also, the opposition is an aspect of awareness. You know what I mean? And I think that also sort of represents the notion that, hey, it's going to come out. You can't keep this sort of thing secret forever. You're going to be outed. It's going to become, public knowledge, and it's going to become a scandal. And unfortunately, I think it's going to sour things. But, Jupiter in Cancer represents sort of, in my opinion, it could possibly represent a sort of panicky reaction. Cancer is domesticated. Cancer wants domestic security, and it can be quite cruel in the way that it obtains domestic security, homeland security, as it were. It can be quite thoughtless about the rights of others and trampling on the rights of others in order to obtain that homeland security. So Jupiter in Cancer can be problematic, especially depending upon the other planet aspect relationships in the sign astery of these charts and within the charts themselves. The Mars between these two nations is very similar. Germany has it at 12 Gemini. We have it, of course, at 21 degrees of Gemini. So it's very similar, being in the same sign and everything. However, very different in its application. So it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I wish America had not done that, but I mean, they didn't consult with me before they did it. They didn't ask my opinion.
I was looking at the charts, trying to figure out what it was that has triggered this unfortunate situation, and it's just so fascinating, because when you progress Germany's chart, the South Node, and I think that everybody that's listening has learned about the South Node because we talked about how tricky it is.
Yeah.
But the South Node in the German chart, when you progress it, is at 29 degrees of Gemini, and transiting Mercury is very, very close to that point. So, and then also when you look at the US natal chart, transiting Venus is conjunct Mars. It's almost like you rumbled transit, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a reason we zero in on the nodal axes, it's because of their publicity, their public nature. Two, because they have the nature of relationship. You see, so there's a reason why we look at these things, and it's just so very interesting to note that the American North Node is only 2 degrees off from the German South Node. They're almost perfectly conjunct, which to me very clearly says that the best interest of both these nations seems to be at odds. You know, what's symbolized by the South Node for Germany, decrease, is very much closely associated to what signifies increase for the American chart. Now, the American North Node is being in Leo, being retrograde again. We've talked about how it's been historically associated with exploration, bubbles in the economy, etc.
Yeah. The U.S. Mars, Stephen, progressed U.S. Mars is conjunct the progressed ascendant in the German charts, which is also something obviously that triggers what's going on. But what's just perfect, absolute classic, undeniable brilliance of astrology and the cosmos is natal Mercury in Germany's chart is at 26 degrees Virgo. We know Mercury is the planet of communication, so if you say something, you express yourself. It's a Mercury action moment, and the progressed Neptune, a planet of confusion, vagaries, and disillusionment, fog, in the US chart is at 26 degrees Virgo. So what do you have? Germany saying Mercury, 26 degrees Virgo, really disillusioned with you. This is really disappointing and confusing.
Oh, for sure.
Neptune, American chart, 26 degrees Virgo. It's exquisite, isn't it? The astrological dynamics are just exquisite.
Yeah, I got to tell you, man, the progressed Mars to the ascendant, that dynamic especially is going to inflame a certain concepts surrounding competency and national virility. You see what I mean? It's going to inflame a sense of competitiveness is what it's going to do. It's going to engender conflicts in the German interior. You know, you talk about the subject matter of the various coffee clutches, you know, the get-together social chatter in the parlors, etc., while taking their Sunday constitutional together, the parlor chatter about American spies, etc. This is going to really be sort of fractious and it's going to, you know, be hotly debated by the German people. And there's the Mars influence over the ascendant also is going to symbolize, you know, tough opposition, you know, sort of an anti-American sentiment, that's a defiance, a rebellion against this entity that has had military bases in their country since the end of World War II. So this could also factor into the grander economic picture shown by the Pluto cycle, and that this could have financial ramifications for America through the guise of those military bases. So we have very concretely defined economic interests in the form of the bases in Germany. And who knows, maybe the future of these bases could be at risk, and as symbolized by the Pluto square to natal Saturn in America's chart that's pending here. So
yeah, we need to be on your sovereign territory to help you and your allies, but we'll also be watching you while we're there.
I tell you what I think, Steve. I really think that the pending Pluto square with Saturn, the transformation through shrinkage, through hardening, I think where that might be felt is perhaps on the military budget, which by all accounts is steroidal. It's veritably glandular in its scope. It accounts for an insane dimension of the American budget, and really, what I expect that to diminish, and that will probably also have a ripple effect on all of the industries dangling from the teat of the military beast. You know, that's
big business. Big business. You want to make money?
The manufacturer of weaponry, and really, you know, you want to go to some of these gun shows where extremely high tech weaponry is shopped for and brokered among, you know, national militaries and also rogue paramilitaries. There's an appalling generic sort of neutrality among the arms vendors. And America, historically, has had a habit of funding both sides at one point or the other. Not concurrently, perhaps, although that's happened too.
Well, not necessarily America concurrently funding, but certain people or groups concurrently funding. And the biggest example would be World War II.
Yeah, for sure. Coca-Cola, once the World War II erupted, could not do business with Nazi Germany. However, Fanta could. Orange Fanta. That's the way Coca-Cola did business with Nazis.
Well, there are much worse examples. Naming no names. I'd like to stay alive.
Right. You don't want to kill the squad.
Talking about guns, and should we talk about Houston, because there was dreadful murder of 6 people in Houston yesterday, and a 7th seriously injured. And we said, oh, well, let's take a look at the chart for Houston, because we can look at a city's chart and see what's going on there. I think that every city should have an astrologer looking at risk.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The city of Baghdad certainly had an astrologer. And, in fact, Baghdad was elected. The cornerstone for the town of Baghdad, the city of Baghdad, was elected by astrologers. And the actual astrologer of Baghdad, I want to say, was Abu Ma'ashar. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to check my text. But, anyway, at any rate, I'm just going to illustrate how important it was to those ancient societies. And so for sure, let's look at the Houston chart. I'm pulling up the transit for the actual event itself. I want to say that was on the 9th, wasn't it? It was yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah. And we said 6 p.m. was it? I think we said, or 7 p.m., 7 p.m., 6:45 p.m. So it's Ronald Lee Haskell. He's the man behind this, apparently. And this was near Houston. And he was looking for his ex-wife, I think, wasn't he? And he went to a member of her family's home, and she wasn't there, and he killed everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I made the news. It was there were a number of children involved in that incident as well, weren't there?
Yeah, and the county constable said, I have not personally in 40 years seen a tragedy in one family that is this horrific.
Gee, hers creepers, man. Well, I'm flooded with charts over here. I swear to God, I can't find my chart for this. I have the chart of Houston up, not the transit chart for the day.
Let me see, I had Houston. We said 7 p.m. for yesterday. Let's see what we've got. Okay. Saturn conjunct the South Node, just in case somebody out there wasn't convinced.
Yeah.
Transiting Saturn conjunct the natal South Node, transiting midheaven, conjunct the progressed South Node. Mercury, our attention, the media, conjunct the progressed ascendant. Transiting Uranus, conjunct natal Pluto. Do we need to say any more?
Oh yeah, that's the challenge there is that that's where the astrocartograph really would come in handy, because then we'd be able to see a lot of these planetary influences localized over, for example, Texas, and there's an entire world of which degree areas of which signs rule over certain regions of the Earth, and that is really quite a sprawling and fascinating avenue of investigation. In and of itself.
We'll have to introduce that to our listeners in a future show, Steve, and do some of that, because it is fascinating.
Yes,
it's fascinating with eclipses particularly, because they say that when it comes to a nation or a geography, that the nation that's actually under the eclipse is most affected. I personally don't believe that stands with individuals. If you've got an eclipse on just your natal sun or your progressed sun, or an eclipse on the south node, you're going to have a significant event or occurrence after that time. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It depends on everything else going on in the chart and the progressions. But I don't think that the rule about where the eclipse occurs is applicable to individuals. I think it's more applicable to mundane astrology. Do you agree?
Yeah, I actually do agree. You know, the famous example there is the eclipse that occurred with the birth of Karl Marx, the father and actually co-founder, I guess you'd say, of communism and Marxist economics. The eclipse that occurred during his birth actually traveled over the region of Russia, right, through the south, right on up to Moscow, and fell over several significant areas of Europe where the Bolshevik Revolution was destined to take place, and where the principles of communism were destined to be actualized. So that's sort of the textbook classic example of the relationship between the actual path of the eclipse and the place of visibility of the eclipse, and the relation of that to the effect that it has on the native's life. So in that example we see there, and I'm open to the idea that a counter example could exist. In this example, what's significant is that the eclipse didn't really seem to affect Karl Marx personally. It showed where his influence would travel. It's a very interesting study. It's still quite complicated despite millennia of studying eclipses. Quite a complex part of the craft. And so this school shootings, mass shootings of any sort, these are certain things that, grisly and grotesque they are, they sort of interest us, in not in an unhealthy or macabre way, but in a more hopefully helpful way as these events become more common. And as we keep studying their charts, we hope to identify emerging patterns in them and use these in a prophylactic way.
And particularly with the research for the book, or the book itself, that we intend to say for the next 20 years, these are the hot spots, these are the hot spots, these are where they'll occur, and these are the things they're likely to involve. And the whole point of that is to raise awareness and avert a problem. Like you said, with the rampage killings, the interest, I think, in both of all this is to understand how metaphysical insight shows us what's on the horizon, so that we can be more in control, that we can avert tragedy.
Absolutely. And as we're coming into the final minutes of our time together here, I'd like to remind those listening that if you would like to harness the power of astrology and tarot to get control over some of the tragedies or forming train wrecks that might be, unfortunately, brewing for you, then visit StephenFrampton.com, visit thegingerpsychic.com, and we'll be glad to listen to you and to apply our analyses to the pertinent charts in your life. Also at StephenFrampton.com, you can find a copy of Thinking Completely Outside the Box, which is an analysis of the rampage shooting in Aurora, Colorado, and quite interesting to read. We've really covered a lot of topics tonight, Steve. It's a lot to keep up with, so if you've listened and managed to keep up this far, pat yourself on the back. This was some pretty tough stuff.
Yeah, but I'm pleased because it's flowed nicely. This is the second time we've worked in this format, and I feel really good about this format now that we've done it twice.
Right. You know how when you're a kid, there was the occasional, very special episode on TV where the hero had to deal with a drug addicted sibling, or or had to deal with some social horror, and you could tell that the episode was very special. We can do that, for example, with doing the deep dive into complete miscreant, as we did with Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer, we can do deep dives. We can really penetrate into certain areas or topics as the need arises. So we'll just play it by ear, everyone. We're coming into the final minute here of our show. Would you like to add anything, Steve?
Just that I want everyone to check out your blog, Stephen, because there's so much good information on there. I know that you did one about the third card in the major arcana, Isis unveiled, or the Empress, and I've got that printed out ready to read. And then also people can hear us working in a different format on Thursday evenings at Psychic Access Talk Radio, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And please stick with us, and please tell people about the show, because the whole idea of this is to raise awareness about the power of metaphysics.
Amen to that. I couldn't agree more. Thanks, you guys, for listening, and we'll see you next week.